up, Flick Connection? This is Darren, here to help you get more out of movies, and today we're going to talk all about The Ritual. The Ritual is a horror movie recently added to Netflix as a Netflix original in the US. It was actually released in theaters in the UK and parts of Europe. And what I'm trying to do here is just give you some tidbits of information that will help you better enjoy this horror flick. And they're not really going to be spoilers to start. So for starters, I really want to just give you some good information if you have not seen The Ritual. It will enhance the viewing experience on the first go. People that have already seen it will find this stuff interesting as well. And then finally, I'll give you a big warning for major spoilers, because we're going to talk about some of the themes of the movie, some of the elements that are questionable, and what they might actually mean. So for starters, The Ritual is actually based on a novel by Adam Neville, and it was actually produced by Andy Serkis. And yes, I do mean that Andy Serkis. And even though it is based on a novel, certain scenes in the movie are actually based on a 70s horror flick called Rituals. Now, director David Brucker previously worked on a couple of anthology films called VHS, which I'm sure a lot of you watching this video have seen. If you haven't, you should check it out. It's pretty cool. And another one called Southbound, that was made with a lot of the same creators, and it's pretty cool too. It's not as good in my opinion. And then before that, he did a movie called The Signal. That's it. That is his director's filmography. I really like The Signal. It came out in 2007. It's about this weird signal that kind of, it basically makes people go crazy, but it doesn't turn them into zombies like you've seen in other movies. It actually makes them do really weird stuff. So that movie's really interesting. It has been on Netflix in the past. If you can get your hands on it, I recommend watching it. Now, the main character, Luke, played by Rafe Spall, you'll recognize him from a couple of movies, most notably Hot Fuzz. He was one of the detectives in that with the mustache. And then he was also in Prometheus. He's got the infamous scene with the alien snake that he, for some reason, decides to pet. And then somewhat related, the actor that plays Dom in The Ritual is actually also in the Alien franchise with Alien vs. Predator. I can't remember exactly what happens to him. I think he might be the first one to get hit with a face hugger, but I don't remember because I only watched that heap of garbage the one time. Now, the original tagline for this movie when it came out in the UK was, "They should have gone to Vegas." But the movie was released right after the Las Vegas massacre last year, and they immediately changed the tagline to, "They should have gone to Ibiza," which are two of the places actually discussed in the opening pub scene before the incident happens. Now, we're going to get into some light spoilers here. If you're interested in watching this movie and you want to know a little bit about what's going on as you watch it, stay tuned. I'll let you know when to tune out if you haven't seen it. Now, we're going to skip way ahead into the movie, and basically, after they're in the woods for a little while, if you've seen the trailers, you know they're in the woods. This isn't a spoiler, but they come across a tree with a symbol engraved on it. Now, that symbol is from an ancient Germanic alphabet, and it essentially means O. It's pronounced O, and that means property. And so if you've seen the movie, that now has some sort of significance, and we see it a couple of more times. We see it as soon as they set foot into the cabin. It's sort of hanging as like a little charm, and then we see it again in the context of a massive spoiler, which I'm going to mention after I give you the spoiler warning. Now, for a mild spoiler, something you see a lot in this movie are bodies hanging from trees in a very specific way. Now, the way that they're hanging is somewhat, but not specifically, it's somewhat reminiscent of the mythology of Odin, which is part of Norse mythology, which is where a lot of the darkness from this movie comes. And Odin basically hung himself from a tree using a spear, and it was a way that allowed him to collect massive amounts of knowledge. And then something else that's going to come into play with the massive spoilers is that spear that Odin, basically hoisted himself with was given to him by Loki. And if that name sounds familiar, he's one of the characters in the Thor Marvel Universe, played by Tom Hiddleston. The actual Loki is a much more devious, sinister character, very, very dark, and we're going to get into some details of that part of the mythology because it's very significant for this movie. Now, there are going to be some massive spoilers coming ahead. They're going to get gradually more spoilerific. So if you want to hang with me, you're welcome to, but I'm about to spoil a big part of this movie that is better left unknown. I recommend watching the movie without knowing this, but here you go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're gonna talk about the monster. Now, before we talk about what the monster is and what it means, let's talk a little bit about the creation of it, because I find this interesting. Guillermo del Toro was actually brought in to help create this monster. Now, he is not credited with this movie, but he did help with the creature design, and the creators of the movie finished it off. They kind of did what they wanted to do, but Del Toro is very famous for his monster designs from the Hellboy movies, Pacific Rim, most recently The Shape of Water, and he came in and sort of helped, and here is Del Toro talking about how he designs monsters.
The most important thing is what you call the silhouette. The silhouette of the monster or the creature needs to be very clean. It needs to immediately tell you what the figure's gait, what the figure's intention is. Well, so you need to imagine the creature sort of in repose, in his own or its own habitat, and try to make it majestic.
Now, I remembered that from years ago, and I've always found it interesting that he talks specifically about the outline, because as soon as I saw the outline of this creature against the flames or the burning village, I immediately thought of Del Toro. I didn't necessarily suspect that he did it. I'm not that smart, but I did think about his creature design, because this creature has just a fantastic outline to it. I thought it was really great and really interesting that he was involved in it somehow. Now let's jump back to the middle of the story where Luke, our main character, wakes up from a dream out by the cabin and his chest is bleeding. Now he's punctured with these 5 holes, and they essentially make a pattern. If you were to connect the dots, it makes the O symbol that I spoke about earlier in the video, which means property. And so it's obvious in the story, it's basically obvious that the creature has marked him, but it's marked him with the word property, which I think is very significant. And then later we see that he is essentially sort of untouchable in the village in terms of being sacrificed. Now, what I think has happened here is the creature has identified him as weak, as someone who will not stand up and resist, meaning he would be fit to be placed in the village to serve the creature. He saw with, in his visions, the liquor store, tragedy with their friend, the whole reason they're out there. He saw that weakness in him and marked him as his property. That is what I believe has happened, and that really is the crux of the ending of this story. And I feel like this is loosely backed up by the fact that the strongest character out of the group of 4 is actually the one that's taken off and killed first. It sort of makes sense that the creature marked the one he wanted to keep and then began to pick them off, starting with the strongest. That strategy makes sense to me, and it basically is what happens throughout the rest of the story. Now, in the village, we're going to jump all the way back to the village. I know I'm jumping around, but in the village, we see one of the cultists, we'll call him cultist, is praying to a stone, and this is actually somewhat of a replica of a stone that is believed to a real stone that is believed to resemble Loki. Now, Loki is very significant to this story as it relates to the creature. The design of this creature, the things that it's kind of sort of made up of, like the giant moose body and the half-human torso head, is not actually based on any part of Norse mythology. It's just loosely based on it, but that type of shape-shifting creature is called a Jotun. And there are several, and essentially they are children and offspring of Loki. So you're kind of getting this cult surrounding the Norse god Loki. There's some Odin symbolism. There's the creature that's a Jotun that the young woman that comes to him in the cabin specifically says it's of the Jotun, the spring of offspring, but she says spring of Loki. So it's said directly, so I'm not speculating here. That is what this creature is. And there are some other creatures that you can look up that have similar things where it'll be like a horse a body, like a demon horse with the torso of a man coming up out of it, almost like a centaur, but it's all based in Norse mythology. Another thing about these Norse shape-shifting gods is supposedly, you know, as legend has it, is they can change their appearance based on how they want to impact whoever's viewing them. So they can make them, you know, be more afraid based on how they look. In this movie, it doesn't appear that this creature can actually do that. It appears that it has a solid form, but it still changes the way its victims perceive the world around them, as we see with the liquor store imagery continuously popping back up and up for Luke. We assume throughout that the same thing's happening to the other characters, but this is really Luke's story. It's his path, so we don't see what's happening with them, but go ahead and assume that it is happening. Now, to me, it's possible that the creature is not actually eating its prey. It seems like it kind of is, and it might be a little bit, but based on what I've told you so far in the Norse mythology this movie is based on, and based on what we actually see in the movie, it appears that it's sort of putting them up in somehow where we don't see the physical thing, the physical exchange happen. It's somehow absorbing knowledge from them and becoming more powerful. So whether it's absorbing their fears or some sort of consciousness from them, it's taking something like that from them, and that's its source of power versus like nutrition from their meat and blood. That's kind of what I think. The movie doesn't say that expressly, but that's what I got from it. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of that. I could be a little off there. For the most part, I'm shooting straight with you, but I am speculating here a bit. Now, the most interesting part about this movie to me is the way it ends, because all along, the monster's repeated attempts to frighten Luke into submission by constantly throwing this liquor store, you know, trauma in his face. He's having to relive it over and over and over again. And obviously, this is metaphorical for him having to deal with the trauma in real life. Most horror movies are a metaphor for some sort of trauma, disease, sickness, you know, things like that. And that's what's happening in this movie. But let's get past the metaphor. It's kind of obvious. What's actually happening is the creature's trying to sort of just beat him into submission with it so that he has another subject in the cult village. And what happens is, because he confronts it so many times, he's ultimately able to deal with it. By the confrontation, he can actually fight back, and that's ultimately what frees him. Now, I think two things are happening here. I think because Luke tries to kill the monster, he confronts it, and he does what he maybe should have done in the liquor store, the monster kind of lets him escape. Now, once he's out of the woods, figuratively and literally, I don't believe the creature can leave the woods, but it is suggested to us throughout the story that it can change the landscape, so that it could basically make it so that he could never get out. And it doesn't do that. If that is true, it does not do that. It essentially lets him go, and it stops screaming at him, and then he finally screams back. And I thought that was a pretty nice end. It's a little bit of a letdown, but man, just that final scene where this creature has been teased out to us, you know, throughout the whole movie, which I thought was really well done. And then to just see the whole thing with the flames in the background, and then the scene where it's running and there's the fluorescent lights from the liquor store and it's running behind the shelves. I thought that was just fantastic imagery. Very, very H.P. Lovecraft, which makes perfect sense because Guillermo del Toro, everything he creates is based on Lovecraft's work. So I love things based on H.P. Lovecraft, you know, mythology. And here we get the Norse mythology, we get H.P. Lovecraft, we get a little bit of Del Toro thrown in. It's just a really nice recipe. I feel like it was really well made. It's not a masterpiece. I mean, I don't mean to tug this movie off too much, but I really liked it a lot. I think it's one of the better things Netflix has put out. I know they didn't produce it, but they are responsible for releasing it in the US and some other countries. So for that, thumbs up, Netflix. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you think I should continue to do videos like this, if you like this format, it's new for me, let me know, because I'll continue making them as long as you guys keep watching them. But thanks for watching, and you will see me next time.